we are starting today with a story that many of you, I know, already have an opinion on. It's this story out of Texas. This woman named Kate Cox asked the state for an emergency abortion, even though it's against the state's near total abortion ban. Her fetus had a fatal diagnosis, which her doctor said could lead to serious health risks for her, as well as future fertility issues. Well, the Texas Supreme Court ruled against her yesterday, saying, quote, some difficulties in pregnancy, even serious ones, do not pose the heightened risks to the mother needed to qualify for a medical exemption to the state's abortion ban, end quote. They also said her doctor failed to prove her condition poses the risks the exception requires. Well, yesterday, Kate's lawyer said she has decided to travel out of state to get the procedure. So here to talk to us all about this case from a medical perspective, we've got our very own Dr. Kohli. Thank you so much for being here. This is such an important story.
Yeah, so Dr. Kohli, talk to us about this fatal diagnosis for Kate's fetus. What is it and what kind of risks does it pose to her as a mom and her health?
So we all know about Down syndrome, right? That's trisomy 21. That means you have 3 copies of chromosome 21. You're only supposed to have 2. This is Edwards syndrome, which is trisomy 18. So you have 3 copies of chromosome 18 instead of 2. But unlike Down syndrome, this is not really compatible with life. So 95% of fetuses that have this abnormality are either miscarried or stillborn. And of the ones that are born, only 5 to 10% live to the first birthday. So this is pretty much a death sentence for this baby. Now, with respect to mom, carrying a baby with trisomy 18 doesn't pose any additional health risks, but I don't know this woman's particular situation. So I feel like if her doctors are saying that she has increased risk of carrying this baby, not just for this pregnancy, but for her future pregnancies, the legal system can't question a medical intervention that the doctors are recommending, which is an abortion. And so to me, it just doesn't make any sense how this has happened.
Well, the Texas Supreme Court also said the doctors can decide if a woman meets the medical necessity exception to get an abortion in the state. So how comfortable would you be to make a decision like that?
You know, I'm not an obstetrician, but if I was an obstetrician in the state of Texas, this is my training. I have been trained during medical school, residency, fellowship to know to do best for my patient and to do best for the patient inside the patient, which is that little fetus. So we have to trust the doctors on this one because the legal system doesn't have the medical training. They don't have the medical background, and yet they're overruling what the doctors are recommending, which is a termination of pregnancy. And I really feel that this is a huge slippery slope because we're setting 2 dangerous precedents here. The first, we're taking autonomy away from us as medical providers and putting it into the legal system. Now, what happens next? What if they decide they don't want to treat an HIV patient because of their sexuality? Are they allowed to do that? What about our autonomy as physicians? And then second, reproductive health care is health care. You know, we forget that a woman carrying a pregnancy could pose risk to her body, could pose risk to her mind. That's not something that we can take away and just hand over to the legal system.
Yeah, and I think something that we need to keep in mind with this case is, yes, this woman, and it's great in her case, can go to another state. But let's think about how many people don't have the means. You know, I remember when Katrina was happening and I would hear people on TV go, well, why don't you just move? Because a lot of people don't understand that a life in which traveling out of the city is impossible. You don't know anybody with a car. You don't have money to get a bus. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to be highlighted, like in a case like this, that will suffer and unfortunately try and take means in their own hands, which is just terrifying to even think about.
Right. That's my real concern, Al, is that people will start reaching for medical abortions. And there are reasons to have a surgical abortion, reasons to have a medical one. When you're farther along in the pregnancy, sometimes you don't get a complete evacuation with just taking the pills, and you get pills off the internet. Start taking them because you don't have access to the surgical means, or you go to another country potentially even, or do backdoor abortions, we used to call them, where you just meet somebody in their garage and they say they're going to do it for you. I mean, it just opens up a whole host of very dangerous things when it comes to our reproductive health care.
Well, Doc, not to just keep harping on this, but for me, it's like the Supreme Court are the smartest people in the land, right? In this case, Texas. It went all the way to them. Logically, you're a doctor, you're telling them 95% is not even going to make it to birth, and if he does, it's not going to make it to his first birthday. You'd think those type of minds would say, hey, here's a little loophole. I understand this is an extreme case, and this is a big case with the presidency coming up. That's what it's really all about, the red and blue. But in this case, you got to say, hey, we're the Supreme Court.
Right.
This baby's not going to make it. For this mother's mental health, for everything that her body's going to go through, let's make an exception in this case. I don't understand why as a country or as a state we can't have these type of loopholes in our system. It makes no sense to me.
It's not even a loophole, it's an exception to
But
your
an
point.
exception,
No,
right?
it's a
Just
good
whatever
point,
the
though.
term is.
I
Yes.
agree with you.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we have to have conversations about exceptions obviously doesn't sit well with any of us.
No.
But you touched very briefly on the idea of mental health because we're always talking about what's happening to the mother physically.
Right.
But if you're putting a woman in a position to potentially be a walking tomb in a lot of these cases,
Can't imagine.
what is happening to you mentally? And also another part that no one talks about is they're saying that this could affect her fertility in the future. It's also delaying her ability to potentially have her rainbow baby.
Right.
So for people who are on a race against time, time is very crucial in those elements, and no one seems to be considering that.
You know, you make a great point because we know that pregnancy is a hyperhormonal state. So mental health problems during pregnancy, especially driven by the hormones, postpartum depression, as you've had, Sam, anxiety, you know, PTSD, all of these types of things. Imagine a woman having to carry this baby, being forced. In a way, I call it mental torture, really, because what they're waiting for is this baby to die inside of her, and then they will perform that abortion. So it's almost you know, it's
that is gross.
Right.
I can't believe you just said that.
Yeah.
It's true, but just to hear it out loud is just.
I know. I just don't understand why we don't let experts be experts. Like, why don't we let the
Because they're trying to
scientists-
prove a point, Sam. That
I understand that.
like Jeff said, there is
I
no
understand
loophole.
that, but you don't ask a mechanic to go ahead and give me advice on my vaccine.
Right.
You don't ask an attorney to give me advice on what I should do. And what is this syndrome called? I don't even know the name of it.
Edwards syndrome.
I bet they don't either.
Right.
And that's my point.
Right.
You're right.
So I can't imagine being a healthcare professional like you. And I feel like now more than ever, you have so many people. How many years did it take you to get where you are today?
17 years of training, and I've been in practice almost 10.
And then you have Joe Schmo on the internet telling you that you don't know what you're talking about.
And it's not just that, Sam, but it's not just taking away my autonomy, but it's intimidating me by threatening me with civil and criminal penalties for doing the right thing for my patient. You know, if I was an obstetrician and I thought that this was medically indicated and I wanted to do it, I would be afraid. I would be afraid to death because you're telling me I might go to prison or have fines or have some sort of legal liability
license?
against my medical license. Yeah. So it's just taken it to a whole new level where I feel like the healthcare system is helpless.
Wow.
And I hope that more physicians speak up and revolt against what is happening because it is disgusting.
Well, thank you for you speaking up today. We appreciate you, Dr. Kohli. TBL Nation, be sure to follow Dr. Kohli on social at Payal Kohli MD. Also subscribe to her YouTube page for the latest science news and headlines. Thank you again.